You're just on mute, Marita.
That some people might actually say that's a good thing. Sometimes my husband especially might say he wished he'd have a mute button, but thanks for letting me know. I hit that by mistake. Right. So our values, one of our values is we have impact, and we want to make sure that whatever actions we do have impact. Here's an example of some of our clients. We've gorgeous Bristol of Bailey's here in Bristol, and we redesigned their values. You'll see them there. We pass on with pride. We roll up our sleeves, and they've taken that now and they're really bringing it to life. Where they're awarding prizes every month for employee value awards. So when the stories around how the employees or managers or team leaders are living those values, really gorgeous, bringing it to life. We've got Brendan, one of our clients up on top there. He's from a medical company, and he wanted to bring across internationally the supply chain culture across the supply chain. So we did a program there. So we call it our Culture Accelerator program. And we saw them when we did the measures on performance, culture, and engagement. We could see that rise in those results. James Reed is a kind of an unusual one. We don't normally work in the professional services side of things, which was a really good challenge for us to try out to see, does our program work across the board? So actually, it doesn't matter whether it's food or whether they're lawyers. It actually works. So the process works. And we saw we did a big program around feedback, and we saw their engagement rise. So that is really lovely to see that impact that we're having. So our motto, we always have a culture. You end up one with whatever you do. So you can either choose to shape it and influence it or take your chances. So this is what we live and breathe by. We know that we have to shape it and influence it. So we talk about designing your culture. And today we are not talking about benefits. We're not talking about gorgeous ping pong tables or anything that is those like nice to haves on top that you build. They're for us the on top things. We are talking about how do you ensure that you have the fundamentals, solid culture throughout the company. So let's quickly, how does culture at its worst show up? What have you seen? I'm sure you've come across it, maybe not in your own companies or previous companies you've worked for. How does it show up? Go on, come off mute and give us an example of what you've seen.
I think toxic behaviour is probably the one for me at the moment.
Toxic
behaviour. Having a couple of few bad eggs that then ruin it for everyone else.
And it can be just one or two that can really impact it massively. Toxic behavior, fantastic. Kathy, I saw you come off a mute there.
I was just thinking, not allowing people to have a voice, so it being very hierarchical and people just, not listening to their staff, I think is a key one I see time and time again.
Listening to the staff and actually truly listening. So some companies you'll see they'll have a more hierarchical nature and they'll still do the surveys, but they just won't take any notice. And that can be more detrimental. Asking for feedback and not doing anything about it can be more detrimental than not asking at all. So it's that, and that really listening and taking on board. And what we see, Kathy, as well is the asking, the taking on board, and then communicating back what we're actually going to do. And also maybe what we're not going to do, because we can't do everything. We have limited resources as well. Anything else?
Staff retention, people just leaving, when the culture's not good.
When the culture's not good. And that's a real indicator. So that tells you that there's something not right inside when you have that high staff turnover. And that is a really great measure to do is staff turnover. What else?
The impact to the customer. Reputational damage.
Reputational damage. So again, that's
the interface with you can have where they're so disengaged, and as the others have said, it's the behaviours. It drives really poor behaviour.
And customer facing. That's a really
and then
measure.
And that actually it feeds right through. Yeah.
It's right through. And looking at customer retention is a great measure, again, a great impact to see what is happening inside. So we get some of our leadership to actually dial in and dial customer services and pretend they're a client and actually see what it's like to actually experience your customer service on the ground, especially when it's a larger company.
Yeah, we actually survey our customers as well as our employees.
Brilliant, great. Good. So toxic behavior, very common one. As Kathy said, not listening to the employees. You see friction. You see silo thinking, silo behaviors in a company. You see a lot of, like in a food company, you'd be measuring like for how good first time production is. That reducing, that is a really good sign of the culture as well. So every different company can have different measures, but how it shows up is how the people are interacting with each other. And that's a really, really great indicator on how it's going. So what kind of culture exists in your organization? So there's we would talk about 4 different types of culture. I need to make it small so I can actually see. The more tribal culture, fearless culture, aggressive culture, and fearful culture. So let's give you a little bit of explanation of what those are. So when we talk about fearless culture, that blue one, it's that visionary, idea orientated, they're experimental, risk-taking, fast-moving, co-creation, really high energy. That's that fearless type culture. Then the aggressive type culture that we would talk about it's demanding, results-driven, results-orientated. There's autonomy. They can take decisions. They're fast, really high speed, and high performing. So that's really, really, really demanding type level of culture. In the fearful, you get the commanding kind of efficiency, really good efficiency in the fearful. There's more on the control. Everything is process, hierarchical, more efficient is the more of the focus. And then the tribal is very much around the people, very belonging, collaborative, democratic, cohesion, very, very social, very people orientated. This is, so before we go to the next one, actually, so where would you actually see your company, or where would the culture that if you're a consultant type person, think of a client you have, where have you come across? Let's put it in the chat. Where would you see your company right now? And they all have pros and cons. So nothing is right or wrong. They all have pros and cons. Yeah, mainly tribal with a little bit of fearless, mainly in the center of all 4. So a bit of each of them, a mix of more than one, yes. And you can have a situation, between tribal and aggressive, and you can have a situation where the leadership are one type of culture and actually the company is a different type of culture. So we've come across that as well. And what is really interesting here is, what about when it's taken to the extreme? So companies, there's pros and advantages to having a company in that box, but when you extend it and when it's stretched and when it becomes to the extreme, that's where you can see some of the disadvantages. So in the fearless, it can be chaotic and vague and unclear roles. So think of that kind of startup feeling, unpredictable. In the aggressive, when taken to the extreme, it can be quite ruthless and exhausting. That kind of rank and yank type of culture, really individualistic of achievement. In the fearful, when you take it to the extreme, there can be it can be slow, democratic or bureaucratic, real red tape. Real purposeless, real around profit making, and in the tribal, around the people, it can be really slow moving, trying to get that group think takes over, conflict avoidance. So really, that cozy feeling, they avoid conflict is actually the most common one we see in the tribal when it's taken to the extreme. We become too nice. So all great to plot the culture, but when taken to the extreme, what are the things that we tend to see? So it's just giving you a feeling of the culture. So three steps even, not strips, steps to a great culture. So we talk about clarity, activation, and measure. So we're going to talk through those three today. That no matter what type of culture, if you're good and you're getting to great, if you're a disaster and you're trying to move to okay, it is the same. You need to make sure you have clarity, you have that activation of those successful behaviors, and you have the measures to make sure that you are moving forward and improving. So let's talk a little bit about clarity. So clarity is two aspects: gathering the intel on the culture and designing the fundamentals. So intel is about finding out what's good about your culture and what's not so good about your culture. So how do you gather the intel today? Give us some examples of how you gather intel.
Exit interviews, stay interviews.
Exit interviews, brilliant, Becky. Liz?
Pulse surveys we do.
Surveys,
Yeah.
Brilliant way, super. What are the ways, even if it's not in your own company, but you come across it, how else can you gather the intel?
Some of the measurements that you take within your teams.
Yeah, measurements in the team. So some metrics is in the teams. Yeah. And how would you get metrics? How would you measure, Gail?
Just the one that I said before, you would be measuring your turnover. You might also be measuring some of the customer feedback that you get. Is that going up or down, and exploring the reasons why?
Exactly. Brilliant. What else?
Glassdoor reviews.
So Carl?
Just speaking to the staff.
Yes, observations, speaking to the staff, your own observations. Absolutely. One of the greatest ones. And a great question you could ask there is, what gets promoted around here? What do you think gets promoted around here? It tells you a great sense of what, if you're just having a chat. Sorry, Becky, was that you as well? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, Glassdoor reviews, Google reviews of your business.
Brilliant, brilliant. And we covered this a lot the last time. We went into more detail on the intel on the last masterclass, levers interviews, stay interviews, board effectiveness reviews, engagement scores, net promotion. There's loads of ways of gathering intel, but ensuring that you're gathering the intel so that you can say, these are the gems that we want to maintain and nurture. And these are the drains on the culture right now. And how do we reduce those drains and really keep and nurture those gems? So that's what you're gathering the intel for. And every company should be really clear on where they are at and where they need to go. The second aspect of clarity is designing the fundamentals. So designing a culture is like designing a house. The fundamentals are critical. And we talk about each aspect of literally the foundations of the culture. What are the walls and the roof of the culture? But the foundations, the fundamentals are critical. And the fundamentals of any culture are the purpose. So why we exist. So what's the why? Well, why do we exist? Outside of making profit, why should I come here? And this is becoming more and more important as the millennials come into the more and more, the Z generation come more and more into our working way, because they are very much focused on having impact, having meaning. Yeah. So they talk a lot about the meaninglessness of life right now. So having purpose, why do we exist? Above and beyond making profit. Why do we exist? Why do we come here? Why do we get up on a Monday morning? And that giving that purpose, that can bring an absolute culture to life. It can make or break a culture. The values, that is what you value, what's important in a company. And values, of course, can be used for attracting talent, recruiting, and then keeping and maintaining those staff, those high performing staff. So values, the what you value. The one I'm going to just quickly talk about is then the behavior. So that's taking values to the next level. And that's saying the how do I live those values? So there we talk about what's teachable and measurable. What do we do around here and what do we not do around here? So what's rewarded and what's punished? And actually, some companies recoil from that word, but actually, what are we saying is non-acceptable and what are we saying is acceptable? Yeah. And then those behaviors, if they're set, they should be from the boiler room to the boardroom. It should be consistent throughout the company. And that's a really, really big one, is, are the leaders behaving and walking the talk? But if the behavior, so clarity for me is that number one must have. Do I know how to live this culture? Do I know what's expected of me? And unless we pinpoint that, then you can't blame everyone. Everyone will just do their best and try and live. I'll interpret the values how I want and how I think they should be lived, unless it's really specified. And this is really great for identifying what are the behaviors that are really successful in your company right now, that are bringing those high profit, high margins, keeping customers happy, keeping teams happy. What is happening right now that are those successful behaviors, and how do we make sure they are consistent throughout? So this is one of our clients, Carey Group. They're a construction client. They're based in London, but they work all over. And we went and helped them define their values. And they very much bought into the what we do, what we don't do. And they bring that into their performance reviews now. That is measured. Are we living the values or are we not? And they made it really clear, whether you're the boots on the ground or whether you're Mr. CEO, these are the behaviors that we are measured against. So really, really valuable to be able to explain, because we can also, values are quite broad and culture can be quite fluffy unless we bring it down to brass tacks and make it really, really measurable. So a quick test for you: is it teachable and measurable? Humility is not teachable and measurable. What it is, Becky's understanding of humility will be completely different to Marita's understanding of humility. So let's bring it down to what we actually mean. So for example, for Carey's, we own our mistakes. So you own up for your mistakes. Really clear, really measurable, really able to give someone feedback going, Marita, you made that mistake and you did not own it. You did not take it on board. So number one must have clarity. Do you have the intel? Have you designed your purpose, values, and behaviors? Second one, activation. So a lot of companies do a lot of work to get to there, and they have their values defined, their behaviors, then nothing. So it stays as beautiful poster or beautiful words on the wall or in a lovely deck. This is all about how do you bring it to life then? And every company must have a plan on how to bring it to life. How do you bring that to life? So we have a 10-stage process that we go through with companies to activate their culture. And it includes how, through their meetings, through decision making, how do we get that peer-to-peer feedback? How do you get those rituals around that employee cycle so that you are bringing that culture to life? And so must have number two, have an activation plan. I'm going to give you an example, that you can take away right now, because obviously it's a big thing, an activation plan. But are you clear about how you want to bring that culture to life? Embedding it in the day-to-day, reinforce. So an example I have is, one of the first things is you can ask is, we talk about culture smart. So we have our culture smart program. So we talk about culture smart managers. Are your managers, do they have the confidence and skills to tackle poor behavior? So your culture is set by the lowest tolerated behavior in the company. So what is that? So what Becky mentioned is those toxic behaviors. That's what sets the bar. Yeah. The lowest or worst one is setting the bar for the culture if it's tolerated. So making sure that every team leader, manager, it doesn't matter where you are, as I talk, boiler room to boardroom, it doesn't matter where you are. Does the manager or the person leading have the confidence and skills to tackle poor behavior? Because that is the key to raising the bar for the culture, eliminating the poor behaviors. And it doesn't even have to be, extreme on the word toxic. It can just be just a little bit etchy, not in line with your culture, not really what you want, and must be tackled. So number two, have an activation plan, but something you can take straight away is, how well equipped are my managers? And when I talk about managers now, I mean anyone who has responsibility for people to be able to tackle poor behaviors, confidence and skills. Third one is measure. So clarity, activation, measure. What gets managed, you have heard of what gets managed gets improved, or gets improved. What gets measured gets managed, you'll have heard of. We talk about what gets managed gets improved. So really picking your culture metrics around what you want to improve. So there are lots of different, it depends on what the focus is. And again, we always say, depending on what stage we are in the activation, what are we trying to get? If it's feedback, for example, we're working on and saying, we're really trying to get from no feedback to at least managers giving people, their employees feedback, to eventually peer-to-peer feedback. That would be, we can actually measure that to see how that is going. And that would be a pulse along the way. So we talk about pulses, anything you're trying to implement, make sure that you are pulsing it and checking, is that behavior in place or not? An example pulse for you guys to take away now is behavior consistency across the company. So we talked about making sure the leaders are walking the talk. We ask, the behaviors of our leaders is consistent with company values, and the behavior of people I work with are consistent with company values. Asking the staff, quick pulse out around, will tell you very quickly, and will feed back to the leaders how they're being seen, and will feed back to your colleagues as well. Really, really nice. So that's an example of a quick pulse you're doing to check, is the behavior consistency? And you can do a pulse for anything. And then you need culture matrix around time to perform, or time to productivity, for example. New recruits, how long does it take them to get up to productivity? It's a big investment of time and money. You know, how you get up to, how long does it take? It can take anything from, depending on what industry you're in, 2 weeks to 9 months in some advanced, Becky will know, in some advanced roles in the production, can take up to 9 months. So the shorter we make that, the better. That's an example. Engagement, net promoter score for employees, measuring high performance, measuring feedback, measuring performance reviews. There is so many metrics you can use, but pinpointing them to what you guys want to improve. Any clarifying questions, or any comments, any takeaways? We'll do a gem and a pledge at the end like we did the last time, but tell me any observations.
One question I've always asked myself in trying to describe what the values are of our work is, are they the reality of the now, or are they aspirational? With the fear that if you end up generating a list that is purely aspirational, they never become realized.
And they become unrealistic.
Exactly. I mean, is that just a question of the activation process not being followed through correctly? Or I'm answering my question as I ask it, really, or is it a point about not collecting enough info in the first place? But I suppose it's a bit of both, isn't it, really?
Exactly, Josh, you answered your own question. It's a bit of both. We would talk about not just the values and are they aspirational or are they not. We talk about what is the company at its best. At its best, what are you? Because, and then what you're trying to do in the activation is make sure that's consistent throughout, aren't you? So it's about what are we at our best, what do we look like? Because you can't change overnight to be a completely different culture. But it's asking about what are we at our best, and they're the values you want to define, because then that brings a reason to make it consistent. They're real, they're realistic, because if they're too different to what you are now, people go, well, that looks like a load of bull, doesn't relate to anything I'd see any day. So they must connect with you now, but you can understand that they're us at our best. So Bailey's, who we talked about there, they had one that was really stretching for them at their best. There wasn't many, as they said, that was at their best. But they were really clear from that at the beginning. They said, those three we're good, but we want to be great at. And this one, we know we're going to have to work hard at to really bring everyone on board. And they openly communicated that to everyone. They said, we're stretching ourselves by adding this in, but we think this could be the one to make us.
Okay.
Mm.
And when values, obviously at their best, they work together well in combination, but sometimes they might be in conflict with one another. For example, we have some very high performing restaurants, and that performance is based on a very efficient, effective form of service, but that at its best comes in contrast with our style of hospitality and being very personable. So how do you deal with that conflict in terms of measurement, I suppose?
Well, it depends. First of all, I would be asking what's important. Yeah. And if they both come up as important. So one thing we do after we've defined the values, Josh, which is a very tough exercise, but so worth doing, is then what are the priorities? So what over what? So I have a lovely example. They have a company and they say people are first, but we're really high margin. And then asking them, so when I, as a leader, so I don't have to come and ask you every time, leadership team, I'm over here working, which should I choose? Which one should I choose? So I have a situation where my client is really needing my guy, and my guy's wife is sick right now, and I don't know whether I should pull him out and push him and make him go, because is the margin that we're going to make from this client more important, or is my taking care of our people more important? So really defining that makes it so much easier to live. So that's I choose this over this. So it's worth choosing what we talk about, the top 3 priorities. So is high performance over personable more important? So get your values defined first, then choose one over this. So things that are really important to you, 2 good things. Which should I choose if I'm pulled down to it? So that's getting real. That's the next level of clarity. Then, Josh, you're thinking the highest level of clarity, but it's so powerful.
And sorry, I'm asking lots of questions. I'll just be my
No,
last one. Firstly, are those priorities dynamic? And secondly, is this set of values dynamic? Is it being reviewed? Is it changing as the organization matures or grows?
So the priorities. So yes, if you're like from a startup to fast growing to an established, yes, the culture can slightly change because of the demands. However, the core of the values should still not change, but they do sometimes need to be refreshed, because where you have, for example, the founders of a company are normally the ones driving the values at the beginning, because it's normally their personal values come out. However, when you go into a stage then where you're bringing an external MD, an external CEO, then that won't be relevant and they need to be refreshed. So we would be saying every 5 years they need to be definitely looked at, especially if there's big changes to the company. Manufacturing, if it's consistent over a time, don't change a whole lot, but the leadership might change. Also the demands. The world is so volatile right now that also the demands on companies change so fast that you need to. But for a fast growing, definitely every 2 to 3 years, have a look at it. For a more established, then maybe every 5 years. And sometimes it can even go to 10 years if there's not any major significant changes in the company.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? Right. So we would invite you to come and book a strategy session with us. I'll put it we do a free hour where we help you look at your culture. Let me just put it in the chat. Here we go. Where you book in, you get into my Calendly calendar and you can book an hour and we talk through your culture, where you are now, where you want to go, some tips on how to get there, what will be the most fast acting, impactful ones to get there, and then if it's appropriate, or is there a way for Hello to support you on that? And but more importantly, we are launching, which is very exciting. We are launching our so we come in as consultants and support cultures, but we're also now starting from 1st of April, we are starting our Workplace Culture Accelerator for culture leaders, where we're asking leaders of the company to come join our accelerator, and we teach them and share with them our files, our resources, and get them to be able to do it themselves. So we see that that's the way for us to have an even greater impact longer term. So we'll be, I would say, come jump on the Calendly for a demo. We can show you what it's about, if that would be something of interest for you, so that you guys are independent and can really do it for yourself. So what we're talking about is building internal culture consultants in your company. So culture smart leaders within your company. So book in, and we can walk through what that is all about, and it's well worth an hour anyway. Even if we don't end up working together, it's well worth the hour. We get to talk about your culture and share some tips. So let's quickly go around and hear a gem and a pledge from you all. Carl, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to target you because you know me. So I'm gonna bombard you first.
I'm not sure about the gem. There's so many bits and pieces in there about where you can find the information from. I've always thought talking to staff, but there's other ones that were in there. My pledge is to review the workplace environment. I think it just needs constantly reviewing. Something to be put in place to constantly review it and keep track of that.
Great, absolutely. And I'm going to share with you, we have a scorecard as well, which if you wanted to measure your culture, how well designed is your culture, it's well worth doing, and it gives you a score and gives you some hints and tips after. So let me just put that in there if that's any use for you guys. So you can go in and measure yourself, and it talks about the 4 categories and gives you some hints and tips. Becky, what about you? What's your gem and pledge?
I think what was interesting to hear you say was about how often you should review your values. Our values were set, well, they were relaunched, should I say, 5 years ago when I started. And actually the business has changed quite significantly, and we've got a different kind of focus. So I feel like there are some we're really good at and we need to keep, but I think there's probably a couple we maybe need to just swap out.
Just tweak a little bit, maybe the language even sometimes, or yeah.
And I would like, whether how open the owners will be to this, I would like our people to choose our values, and the ones that we add in, I would like them to have involvement in it.
Yeah, brilliant. Gail.
So what my gem is actually the pulse questions. Those 2 pulse questions were really, really simple and straightforward. So and actually the answers to which could be really powerful. So definitely use them. And then my pledge is to explore the Culture Leader program in a bit more detail.
Amazing. Josh, what about for you? What was your gem and pledge?
I think my gem was probably one of the things you opened up with, the fact that there is always a culture and you either get to choose to shape it or it's defined for you. It's very prescient for me at the moment, and the questions that we're asking ourselves. I think in terms of a pledge, getting that info down, as I mentioned, we're working a lot on the cultural stuff at the moment, and it's being driven a lot from the C-suite more than anything else. So going down to the boiler room and asking people what it's really like for them right now is going to be a valuable exercise that I'll take away.
Super, Josh, warms my heart. Liz.
Mine would be the 4 culture types, because as Becky said, the culture has evolved, and same here, and it would be nice to really get to map what we know within that and see where we're evolving from and to.
Where do you want to go?
And where, and so that's also my pledge within the to actually dive into that. And something that resonated with me as well is what Josh had mentioned earlier about what's aspirational, to really get the buy-in, and what Becky has said in terms of any additional kind of values or anything. It should really not be just all driven from the top. It has to come all the way up and across.
Across. So we did a poll actually last week on LinkedIn asking who should be involved in defining the values. All employees, a representative cross section, or just the leadership. So the one that won was a representative cross section, and was about 56%, and about 42% said all employees, and then leadership was a very 10% or something. So that's interesting for you guys.
Yeah, it is.
So, but representative cross section, and the majority of people who answered were MDs. Just as an interesting piece.
Do you think part of that though is because they don't want to do that and they want to give that to HR to do, and they probably see HR as a representative of all sections? I feel like probably the realistic answer.
Yeah. So, I mean, we would say that at minimum, you need a cross section. You need, we run workshops with a cross section of the organization representing each. You may not be able to do all employees, that's okay, but making sure you have representatives in the across, it's a must. You can't just do it with the lead, and you can't just do with HR, because you have to have the leadership involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and you're very right, Becky, because you don't want them to be left out.
What they see as the fluffy stuff, isn't it?
That's why you have to have the culture metrics. Definitely.
I know.
Metrics.
I know.
So we talk about culture as a KPI, actually, like getting it up there high on the agenda, having it so evolved that you know what you're measuring, and it's up there, as well as your cash flow, profit, all of them, it's up there. Culture as a KPI. That's the ultimate goal, actually, of our culture accelerator is eyes on the prize, eyes on the prize. Great, guys. Super lovely to have you guys. Book in for your strategy session. I'll send an email out after with the recording, and the link will be on there. So book in. It would be great to see you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Day.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Lovely to meet you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Likewise.